The notification came through on a Tuesday at 2:09 p.m. Not an email. A calendar block. 60 minutes. Conference room Veridian. My name, my manager's name, and HR. No agenda. No subject line. Just the time and the room and the particular silence of a meeting that doesn't need to explain itself. I had been in pharmaceutical quality long enough to know what a 60-minute block with HR and no agenda meant. I saved the batch record review I was working on, closed my laptop, and walked to Veridian on the 4th floor with my badge and my notebook and the specific kind of composure that comes from having already done the math. I was right about all of it. My name is Renata Solís. I'm 47 years old, and for 13 years I was Director of Quality Assurance at Veridian Pharma, a mid-sized specialty pharmaceutical manufacturer based in Raleigh, North Carolina. We produced 3 FDA-approved drug products, a controlled-release cardiovascular compound, a pediatric antibiotic suspension, and a topical antifungal line that had been in continuous production for 9 years. Not blockbusters. Workhorses. The kind of products that keep hospitals stocked and don't make headlines unless something goes wrong. I made sure nothing went wrong. In 13 years, Veridian had 0 FDA warning letters. 0. The industry average for a company our size and production volume is 2 to 3 over a decade. I had built the Veridian quality management system from a collection of binders and spreadsheets into a fully integrated compliance infrastructure that tracked every batch, every deviation, every corrective action, and every supplier audit in real time. The system had caught $4.2 million in potential recall exposure over the last 4 years alone. Not hypothetical exposure. Actual batches, actual deviations, caught before they reached distribution. I had also built the Veridian Supplier Qualification Framework, which governed every raw material vendor we used. Pharmaceutical manufacturing lives and dies on its supply chain. One unqualified supplier, one undisclosed change in an excipient, and you are looking at a recall, a consent decree, or worse. My framework had reduced supplier-related deviations by 67% over 6 years and had been cited by our FDA district office as a model during our last inspection. That inspection was in March. The lead investigator, a woman named Patricia Huang who had been doing pharmaceutical inspections for 18 years and did not give compliments casually, had looked at my documentation system and said, "This is the cleanest quality record I've seen at a facility this size." I thanked her and kept my expression neutral. I had also, in 13 years, missed my mother's 70th birthday dinner because a batch deviation on the cardiovascular line required my sign-off before the product could be released. I had taken exactly 1 full week of vacation in the last 4 years, and I had checked my email every morning of it. My husband had stopped commenting on this. He understood, the way spouses of people in regulated industries eventually understand, that the job does not pause because you are not in the building. There was one more thing about my role at Veridian that I will get to shortly. The most important thing. The thing that nobody in that conference room on Tuesday afternoon had thought to check. But first, let me tell you about Dominic Farrell. Dominic arrived at Veridian in January as the new Vice President of Operations. He was 34 years old, the son of Gerald Farrell, who sat on Veridian's board of directors and had been a significant early investor in the company. Dominic had a degree in business administration, 2 years at a consulting firm that specialized in consumer packaged goods, and approximately no experience in pharmaceutical manufacturing, which is a regulated industry with a specific and unforgiving set of rules that do not bend for people who are unfamiliar with them. He arrived in a suit that was clearly expensive and slightly too long in the sleeve, which is the kind of detail you notice when you spend 13 years looking at things that don't quite fit. His first week, he sat in on a batch release review I was running with my team. He looked at the deviation log on the screen and said, "What's the CAPA status on these?" Corrective and preventive action. A real term. I was briefly encouraged. 7 open, 3 closed this cycle, I said. The open ones are all within their target resolution dates. He nodded slowly. And these are all, what, like quality tickets? My senior quality specialist, a woman named Biakonkwo who had been with me for 8 years and had the particular gift of keeping her face completely still when she was appalled, looked at her laptop screen. "They're formal deviation investigations," I said. "Each one documents a departure from a validated process, the root cause analysis, and the corrective action plan. They're part of our FDA submission record." Dominic nodded again. "Right. So basically quality tickets." He typed something. I did not ask what. Over the following 6 weeks, Dominic attended meetings he hadn't been invited to, asked questions that had been answered in the previous sentence, and began referring to the quality function as the compliance overhead, which was a phrase I had never heard applied to a department that was legally required to exist in pharmaceutical manufacturing. He also started talking about efficiency, not in the way of someone who understood what efficiency meant in a regulated environment. In the way of someone who had been told that headcount reduction was the same as operational improvement and had not yet learned that in pharma, the people you cut are often the people standing between you and a federal enforcement action. In February, he reorganized the operations reporting structure. 3 managers who had reported to me on cross-functional quality matters now reported to him. I raised a concern in writing. He responded with a meeting where he used the phrase "streamlining the decision architecture" 4 times and explained nothing. My quality systems manager, a careful and precise man named Thomas Reyes, who had joined us from a contract manufacturing organization 5 years earlier and understood regulatory risk better than anyone in the building except me, came to my office after that meeting and closed the door. "He doesn't know what he's doing," Thomas said. "I know. Nadia, if he starts making production decisions without quality sign-off." "Thomas." He stopped. "Document everything. Every meeting, every decision, every time someone asks you to do something that doesn't follow the quality plan. Date it. Keep a copy." He looked at me. "How bad is this going to get?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I know what it looks like when someone mistakes a regulated industry for a regular one." In March, Dominic presented a resource optimization plan to the CEO and the board. I was not in that meeting. I found out about it from our CFO, a quiet and methodical woman named Sandra Chu, who had been at Veridian for 9 years and had the useful quality of telling you exactly what happened without editorializing. She found me in the hallway after the board meeting. "They approved a headcount reduction in quality," she said. "How many positions?" 3, plus a senior role elimination. I looked at her. "Yours," she said. I nodded once. "Sandra, did anyone ask about regulatory continuity?" She paused. "Dominic said quality oversight would be absorbed into operations. Did anyone ask how?" She looked at me for a moment. "No." I thanked her and went back to my office. That was March 18th. I had been preparing since January 31st. The conference room on the 4th floor was called Veridian. It had a rectangular table, 8 chairs, and a window that looked out over the parking structure. The air conditioning ran slightly too cold, the way it always does in rooms where people are asked to accept things they haven't chosen. Dominic was there. Our HR director, a man named Phil Garrett, who had the practice neutrality of someone who had delivered bad news so many times it had become a technical skill. And Sandra, who was present because someone had decided her presence made it more professional, and who spent the entire meeting looking at the table with the expression of a person who disagrees with what is happening and has calculated that saying so will not change it. Dominic had a folder. He opened it without preamble. "Renata, as part of our operational restructuring initiative, we're eliminating the Director of Quality Assurance role effective today. Quality oversight will be integrated into the operations function going forward. This is a strategic realignment and not a reflection of your contributions." Not a reflection of your contributions. That sentence does a specific kind of work in corporate America. It means, we know this is indefensible on merit, so we're going to preemptively say it isn't about merit and hope that lands as comfort. "Your severance package includes 8 weeks of base salary," Phil said. "We'll need your badge and access credentials before you leave today." I looked at Dominic. He had the expression of a man who had rehearsed this and was relieved to be past the hard part. "Who will be the named responsible person on the FDA manufacturing license?" I asked. He blinked. "We'll handle the transition internally." "With whom?" "We have resources." I looked at him for one more second. Then I looked at Phil. "Understood," I said. I stood up, smoothed my jacket. Picked up my notebook. Sandra finally looked at me directly. Her face said several things she was not going to say out loud. I gave her a small nod. She gave me one back. Then I walked out of conference room Veridian, took the elevator to my office, packed my personal items into the bag I had brought specifically for this day, and left the building at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The drive home took 18 minutes. I did not call anyone. I did not process it out loud. I had been processing it since January. What they didn't know is this. In pharmaceutical manufacturing, the FDA does not license a facility in the abstract. It licenses a facility under the oversight of a specific, named, qualified individual. That person is called the responsible person, and their name, credentials, and contact information are embedded in the facility's manufacturing license, their drug application submissions, and their establishment registration with the FDA. At Veridian Pharma, that person was me. Had been me for 9 years. My name was on the FDA establishment registration. My name was on the drug master files for all 3 products. My name was on the site master file that governed our manufacturing license. When the FDA wanted to communicate with Veridian about a compliance matter, they communicated with me. When an inspector arrived at our facility, they asked for me by name. When our license was renewed, my credentials were the credentials that supported the renewal. This is not a technicality. This is the architecture of pharmaceutical regulation. The FDA does not recognize a company's internal reorganization as a reason to change the named responsible person without formal notification, updated submissions, and a review period. You cannot simply absorb quality oversight into operations and assume the license follows. The license follows the person. I had known this since the day I was first named on the registration, 9 years ago. I had known it with increasing clarity since January 31st, when Dominic had first used the phrase compliance overhead in a meeting, and I had understood, with the particular precision of someone who reads regulatory guidance documents for professional reasons, exactly where this was heading. On February 3rd, I had done something that was entirely within my authority, entirely within my professional obligations, and entirely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. I had consulted with a regulatory attorney named James Whitfield, who specialized in FDA enforcement and pharmaceutical compliance law and had the useful quality of being very precise about what the regulations required and what they did not forgive. He had confirmed, in writing on February 7th, that the named responsible person on a pharmaceutical manufacturing license cannot be removed from that role without formal FDA notification, that the company bears the obligation to file that notification, and that failure to do so within 30 days of a personnel change constitutes a reportable compliance event. He had also confirmed that if the FDA discovered the named responsible person was no longer employed at the facility without proper notification, the agency had the authority to suspend the manufacturing license pending review. I had kept that letter. I had also, on February 10th, done something else. I had reviewed every FDA submission that carried my name, every drug master file, every annual product review, every site master file update. I had created a personal professional archive of every document I had authored, every inspection I had managed, every corrective action I had closed. Not company property, my own work product. The institutional knowledge that existed in my head before it existed in any document, and that would continue to exist in my head after I left the building. I had also noted, carefully, that Veridian had no one else on staff with the regulatory credentials to replace me as named responsible person. Not Dominic. Not Phil. Not the 3 quality managers who now reported to Dominic. None of them had the FDA qualification history, the inspection experience, or the regulatory standing to be named on a pharmaceutical manufacturing license. Dominic had eliminated the only person who could legally hold the role he was eliminating. He did not know this. He had not asked. That is the thing about regulated industries. They do not care whether you knew the rule. They only care whether you followed it. I had followed every rule for 13 years. I went home, made dinner, and waited. The 30-day clock started the day I left the building. The FDA's regulations are specific. A facility must notify the agency within 30 days of a change to the named responsible person. The notification requires the new person's name, credentials, and a certification that they meet the qualification requirements. Veridian had 30 days to file that notification. They did not file it. I know this because James Whitfield had contacts at the FDA district office, and because the FDA's establishment registration database is public, and because I checked it on day 31. My name was still on the registration, which meant Veridian had not notified the FDA, which meant they either did not know they needed to, or they had not found anyone qualified to replace me, or both. I suspected both. On day 32, I received a call from B. She called from her personal cell, which told me she was not calling from the office. "I'm not supposed to be calling you," she said. "I know. Something happened this morning." I waited. "We got a letter from the FDA. Addressed to you, care of the facility." I said nothing. Phil opened it. Then he called Dominic. Then Dominic called legal. Then everyone went into the Veridian conference room and nobody came out for 2 hours. What did the letter say? B exhaled. I didn't see the whole thing, but Thomas saw the header before Phil took it. It said Notice of License Suspension Review. There it was. Not a warning. Not an inquiry. A suspension review. Which meant the FDA had identified the discrepancy between my employment status and my named status on the registration, and had initiated the formal process that precedes a license suspension. "How's the floor?" I asked. "Running," she said. "For now. But if the license gets suspended." "I know, Renata." Her voice was quieter now. "The cardiovascular line alone is $18 million in annual production. If they shut it down." "I know, B." A pause. "Do you have a plan?" I looked at the letter from James Whitfield on my desk. At the regulatory archive I had built over the last 2 months. At the FDA establishment registration database, still open on my laptop, with my name still listed as the responsible person at a facility I no longer worked for. "Yes," I said. She let out a breath. "Good. Go back to work. Document everything. And if anyone asks you to do anything that doesn't follow the quality plan, write it down before you do it." "Already am," she said. Then Thomas called. He called 20 minutes after B, also from his personal cell, also in a voice that was trying to be calm and not entirely succeeding. "They're panicking," he said. "Tell me." Dominic called a meeting with the 3 quality managers. He asked them which one could take over as named responsible person. None of them have the FDA qualification history. He didn't know that was a requirement. He thought it was just a title. I let that sit for a moment. What did he do when they told him? Thomas said he asked if they could just update the paperwork. Update the paperwork. As if the FDA's named responsible person requirement was a form field that could be corrected with a different name and a signature. As if 9 years of inspection history, qualification documentation, and regulatory standing were administrative details that transferred with a job description. What did legal say? "They're on the phone with outside counsel right now." I heard Phil say the words emergency regulatory review. Emergency regulatory review. That phrase costs money before anyone has done anything. Outside pharmaceutical regulatory counsel bills at rates that make standard corporate legal fees look modest, and they bill by the hour, and the hours required to respond to an FDA suspension review are not few. "Thomas," I said. "Yeah, keep your work clean. Don't sign anything you're not comfortable signing. And if anyone asks you to certify something that isn't accurate, call me before you do it." "Okay." A pause. "Renata, how bad is this going to get?" I thought about the cardiovascular line. $18 million in annual production. The pediatric antibiotic suspension. The antifungal line. 3 products, 1 license, 1 named person, and 32 days of regulatory silence that the FDA had just noticed. "It's going to get very bad," I said. "Before it gets better." He didn't say anything to that. "Thomas, you're going to be fine. Keep documenting." I hung up. Then I called James Whitfield. "They got the letter," I said. "I know." My contact at the district office confirmed the suspension review was initiated this morning. Timeline. If they don't respond with a qualified replacement and a remediation plan within 15 business days, the suspension becomes effective. Once it's effective, they cannot manufacture, package, or distribute any of the 3 licensed products until it's lifted. 15 business days. 3 weeks. What does lifting it require? A named responsible person with qualifying credentials. Updated submissions. An inspection, likely. And a demonstration that the quality system is intact and functioning. I said nothing for a moment. James, what does the quality system look like right now? He paused. From what I understand, the Director of Quality Assurance role has been eliminated and quality oversight has been absorbed into operations. Yes. Then the quality system, as the FDA would evaluate it, does not currently have a qualified head. No. Which means even if they find someone to name on the license, they still need to demonstrate a functioning quality infrastructure. Yes. A pause. Renata, you built that infrastructure. I did. And you're the only person who can certify it to the FDA's satisfaction. I am. He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, what do you want to do? I looked at the window. Quiet afternoon. My own kitchen table. James Whitfield's letter in a folder. 13 years of work sitting in an archive that only I could fully interpret. I want to have a conversation, I said. But not today. When? When they call me. He said, they'll call tomorrow. He was right. Dominic called at 8:47 the next morning. His voice was wrong immediately. Too fast. Too controlled. The voice of a man trying to sound like he was managing a situation that was managing him. Renata, we have a regulatory matter that requires some knowledge transfer. I'd like to set up a call today to discuss a short-term consulting arrangement. Knowledge transfer. That phrase. As if 13 years of regulatory expertise was a file that could be transferred in an afternoon. I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. I appreciate you reaching out, I said. I'm not available for a call today. This is time-sensitive. I understand. Renata, we have a compliance situation that. I know what you have, I said. A pause. I'll be in touch, I said. Through my attorney. Then I hung up. He called back at 10:15. And at 1:30. And at 4:02, that last one from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Veridian's outside regulatory counsel, a firm out of Washington, D.C., whose senior partner left a voicemail that was very professional and very expensive sounding and contained the phrase urgent regulatory remediation timeline. I listened to all 3 messages. Then I called James Whitfield and said, they've engaged outside counsel. I know. They called my office too. What did you tell them? That I represent you and that any discussions about a potential engagement would need to go through me. Good. Renata. His voice was careful. They're going to come with a number tomorrow. It's going to be a large number. I know. What's your number? I had been thinking about this since February 7th, when James had first confirmed in writing what I already knew about the named responsible person requirement. I had been thinking about it with the same precision I applied to everything else. Not emotionally. Mathematically. The cardiovascular line produced $18 million in annual revenue. The pediatric antibiotic suspension produced $6.4 million. The antifungal line produced $3.1 million. Total license production, $27.5 million annually. Every day the license was suspended was a day that production stopped, that orders went unfulfilled, that customers looked for alternative suppliers, that contracts came under review. 15 business days to respond. 3 weeks to suspension. And then, after suspension, an inspection process that could take months. I was the only person who could prevent that. I was also the only person who could fix it after it happened. My number, I said, is not a consulting rate. James was quiet. I'm not going back as a contractor, I said. I'm not going back as an interim. I'm not going back for 60 days or 90 days or any other number of days that ends with me leaving again. What are you going back as? I looked at the window. Quiet afternoon. The same kitchen table where I had eaten dinner the night they fired me, where I had reviewed James's letter the morning after, where I had built the case for what came next with the same methodical patience I had applied to every quality system I had ever built. Vice President of Quality, I said. Reporting to the CEO, not to operations. full authority over the quality function, the compliance infrastructure, and every regulatory submission that carries my name. And compensation? Base salary of $340,000. That's 3 times my previous base. Signing bonus of $80,000. Equity participation at 0.8% over a 4-year vesting schedule. James said nothing for a moment. And Biaconquo and Thomas Reyes returned to quality reporting lines with 20% salary increases and written acknowledgement that their work during this period was conducted under conditions that were not of their making. That's a significant ask. It's an accurate one. They may push back. They may. And if they don't agree? I thought about the FDA suspension review. The 15-day clock. The $27.5 million in annual license production sitting idle. The outside counsel billing by the hour. The board member whose son had caused all of this, now watching his investment evaporate in real time. Then they spend the next several months trying to find someone with my qualification history who is willing to walk into a suspended facility and rebuild a quality system from scratch, I said. And I spend that time deciding what to do next. James said, "Give me until morning." He called back at 7:30 a.m. with a term sheet draft. I read it twice. Made 4 changes. Sent it back. He confirmed at 9:45 a.m. The call that changed everything came at 11 o'clock. Not from Dominic. From Gerald Farrell, the board member. Dominic's father. A man I had never spoken to directly in 13 years, because board members and quality directors do not typically have occasion to speak directly, unless something has gone very wrong. Something had gone very wrong. "Miss Solís," he said. His voice was measured. Careful. The voice of a man who had made a great deal of money by knowing when he was in a bad position. "Mr. Farrell, I understand you've been in discussions with our outside counsel." "Through my attorney, yes." A pause. "I'd like to speak with you directly if you're willing." "I'm willing. We have a situation that requires resolution quickly." "I think you understand the scope of it." "I do. I also think," he said, slowly, "that we made a mistake." That sentence from a board member about a decision his son had made was not nothing. It was, in fact, the most expensive sentence Gerald Farrell had said in years, because it was the sentence that preceded everything that came next. "I appreciate that," I said. "What will it take to fix this?" I said, "My attorney sent your counsel a term sheet this morning." A pause. "I've seen it." "Then you know what it takes." He was quiet for a moment. "The equity component is unusual for this role level. The situation is unusual." Another pause. "The documentation requirement. The formal incident report." "Yes. Dominic is," he stopped. Started again. "That's going to be a difficult conversation internally." "I imagine it will be." "Is it negotiable?" I said no. The silence that followed was long enough that I counted it. 7 seconds. Then Gerald Farrell said, "I'll have Patricia call your attorney this afternoon." Patricia was Veridian's general counsel. She called James at 2:15 p.m. The agreement was signed at 5:30. I did not celebrate. I made dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. There was still a great deal of work to do, and work does not benefit from celebration before it is finished. But first, let me tell you what happened in the 2 weeks between Dominic's voicemail and Gerald Farrell's phone call. Because the story of how a company falls apart is always more instructive than the story of how it gets put back together, and Veridian's fall was instructive in ways that I suspect Gerald Farrell will be thinking about for the rest of his career. By the end of the 2nd week after my termination, Veridian Pharma had stopped being a pharmaceutical company and started being a liability. The FDA suspension review letter had arrived on day 32. What I did not know until B called me again, for days after her first call, was that the letter had not arrived alone. It had arrived with a secondary notice, a request for a facility inspection within 30 days, which is the FDA's way of saying, "We are not waiting for you to sort this out on your own. We are coming to look." An unannounced inspection at a facility without a named responsible person is not a compliance event. It is a compliance emergency. They called me from the parking lot of a gas station 2 miles from the office. "They got a second letter," she said. "Inspection request. 30 days. I know. Dominic told the quality managers to prepare the inspection-ready documentation package. I waited. Renata, none of them know how to prepare an inspection-ready documentation package. That's not what they do. That's what you did. I know. He gave them your SOPs and told them to follow the checklist. Standard operating procedures. Documents I had written. Checklists I had built. Being handed to people who had never run an FDA inspection and told to execute them without the institutional knowledge of why each step existed and what the inspector would actually be looking for. How are they doing? I asked. B was quiet for a moment. Thomas found 3 gaps in the batch record documentation in the first hour. Gaps that you would have caught in review. He flagged them to Dominic. What did Dominic say? He said to close them out and move on. Close them out and move on. In pharmaceutical quality, you do not close out a documentation gap by deciding it is closed. You investigate it, document the investigation, determine whether it affects product quality or regulatory status, and file a formal deviation report. Telling a quality manager to close out a batch record gap and move on is the regulatory equivalent of telling a surgeon to skip the part where they count the instruments before closing. Is Thomas documenting Dominic's instruction? Yes. He called me right after. Good. Then she said, there's something else. I waited. Veridian Cardiology Group. They placed a hold on their standing order. Veridian Cardiology was our largest single customer for the cardiovascular compound. $3.8 million in annual orders. They had been a Veridian customer for 7 years. Their medical director, a precise and demanding man named Dr. Alan Cho, had called our customer service line asking for a quality certificate update on their most recent shipment, which was a routine request that should have taken 20 minutes to fulfill. It had not been fulfilled. Because the person who generated quality certificates was one of the 3 quality managers who now reported to Dominic, and that person had been pulled off their normal work to prepare inspection documentation. And the certificate request had sat in a queue for 6 days without anyone noticing. Dr. Cho did not wait for 7 days. He placed a hold on the standing order and sent a formal inquiry to Veridian's quality department asking for an explanation of the delay and a confirmation of the current quality management structure. The inquiry went to Dominic because quality now reported to Dominic. Dominic responded. I know what he said because Sandra Chu forwarded me the email chain 3 days later from her personal account with no message. Just the chain. Dominic had written, "Thank you for your inquiry. We are currently undergoing a quality function integration as part of our Operational Excellence Initiative. Your certificate will be processed within the next business cycle. We appreciate your patience as we optimize our compliance delivery model." Compliance delivery model. Dr. Cho had been receiving quality certificates from pharmaceutical manufacturers for 22 years. He knew what a quality function integration meant. He knew what an Operational Excellence Initiative meant. He knew, with the precision of a man who had spent 2 decades evaluating pharmaceutical suppliers, that those phrases meant the quality department had been restructured and nobody was currently in charge of it. He escalated to his hospital's pharmacy director. The pharmacy director called Veridian CEO. That call lasted 11 minutes. Sandra told me later that the CEO had not spoken for approximately 9 of them. The cardiovascular compound standing order, $3.8 million annually, was formally suspended pending a quality assurance review. That was the relational failure. The technical failure had been the batch record gaps. The financial failure came next. Veridian's Q2 earnings call was scheduled for the 3rd week of the crisis. The CEO had planned to present stable production numbers and a positive outlook for the second half of the year. What he presented instead was a preliminary statement acknowledging a regulatory review process and a temporary production adjustment, which is the investor relations language for, "We have a problem we are not ready to fully describe." The stock dropped 11% in 2 days. Gerald Farrell, who held a significant personal position in Veridian equity, watched $2.1 million in personal portfolio value evaporate over 48 hours. That is when he called me. Not Dominic. Not outside counsel. Gerald Farrell himself, at 11 o'clock in the morning, with the measured voice of a man who had done the math and arrived at the only conclusion the math supported. Before that call, though, There was one more thing. Dominic had been asked to present the regulatory remediation plan to the board on day 18. This was his opportunity to demonstrate that he understood the situation and had a credible path to resolution. The board had cleared 2 hours. Outside counsel was on the line. Sandra was in the room. He presented for 40 minutes. Sandra called me that evening. He used the phrase quality reintegration pathway 11 times, she said. Is that a real term? No. What did the board ask? One of them asked him to explain the specific steps required to satisfy the FDA's named responsible person requirement. I waited. He said they were working with outside counsel to identify a qualified candidate. And? The board member asked how long that would take. What did he say? Sandra paused. He said he was confident they could identify someone within the next few weeks. A few weeks. The FDA inspection request had a 30-day window. They were already on day 18. A few weeks to find someone with a regulatory qualification history to be named on a pharmaceutical manufacturing license at a facility currently under suspension review, with an inspection pending. There is no such person available on a few weeks' notice. That is not how pharmaceutical regulatory careers work. The people qualified to hold that role are employed, and they are employed because companies that understand pharmaceutical regulation know how rare they are. The board member who had asked the question looked at the others around the table. Sandra said the room went very quiet. Then the board chair said, "Thank you, Dominic. We'll take it from here." That was the sentence that ended Dominic Farrell's authority over the situation. Not a firing. Not a formal action. Just a quiet, final reassignment of the problem to people who understood its weight. Gerald Farrell called me the next morning, and I told him what it would take. The term sheet James had drafted was not complicated. It was precise. Every number had a reason. Every condition had a function. The equity component existed because I was not returning to rebuild a company I did not own a piece of. The formal incident report existed because a company that does not document what went wrong will repeat it. The team reinstatement existed because B and Thomas had done nothing wrong and had, in fact, done everything right, and the acknowledgement of that was not optional. Dominic had one objection. He raised it through outside counsel, which told me he already knew it wasn't going to land. The formal incident report, his counsel said, created unnecessary legal exposure and was not standard practice for an internal personnel matter. James called me after receiving that message. They're pushing back on the documentation requirement, he said. I know. They're framing it as a legal liability concern. It is a legal liability concern, I said. For Dominic. Do you want to negotiate on it? No. James was quiet for a moment. They may walk away. They won't. How do you know? I thought about the FDA inspection window. 12 days remaining. The cardiovascular line idle. The Veridian cardiology order suspended. The stock down 11%. Gerald Farrell's personal portfolio down $2.1 million. Outside counsel billing by the hour. Because the cost of walking away is higher than the cost of the report, I said. And Gerald Farrell knows how to read a balance sheet. James said, I'll hold the line. He held it. Outside counsel called back at 4 p.m. They had one modification to the documentation language, a narrowing of scope that was cosmetic and did not change the substance. I accepted the modification. The substance was intact. The agreement was signed at 5:30. I walked back into Veridian Pharma the following morning at 7:45 a.m. Not through the side entrance I had used for 13 years. Through the main lobby, past the reception desk, past the framed photographs of the facility and the product lines and the FDA inspection certificates that had my name on them, past the security desk where the guard, a man named Marcus who had worked the morning shift for 6 years and always had coffee ready by 7:30, looked up when I came through the door. He stood up. Miss Solís, he said. Good morning, Marcus. He smiled. The kind of smile that contains a full sentence. The 4th floor was quieter than I expected. People at their desks, doing what they could with what they had. The particular institutional stillness of an organization that has been running on adrenaline and is cautiously beginning to believe the adrenaline might not be necessary anymore. Bea was at her desk. She saw me before I reached her. She stood up, and her face did the thing faces do when something you have been holding your breath about finally resolves. Not dramatic. Just a long, slow exhale, and then a very small smile, and then she sat back down and said, "Where do you want to start?" "Batch records," I said. "Then the inspection prep. Then the FDA response letter." "I pulled everything last night," she said. "It's on your desk." My desk. Still my desk. Nobody had reassigned it. Thomas was 2 offices down. He appeared in my doorway 30 seconds after I sat down, holding a folder and looking like a man who had been waiting to hand that folder to the right person for 3 weeks. "Inspection prep status," he said. I took the folder. "Walk me through it." He did. For 45 minutes, standing in my office doorway, he walked me through every gap, every deviation, every documentation issue that had accumulated in the 22 days since my termination. He had flagged all of it, dated all of it, documented every instruction he had received that he had concerns about, and every instance where he had pushed back, and every instance where he had been overruled. It was the most thorough handoff document I had ever received. "Thomas," I said when he finished. "Yeah, this is excellent work." He shrugged, the way people do when they have done something difficult and are not sure they are allowed to feel good about it yet. "I just documented what I saw." "That's the job," I said. "That's exactly the job." He nodded once. Then he went back to his desk and started working. I called James at 8:30. "I'm in," I said. "How does it look?" "Manageable. 3 weeks of work, maybe 4. The inspection prep is behind, but not irreparably." Thomas kept good records. "The FDA response letter needs to go out today." "I know. I'm drafting it now." The response letter to the FDA took 4 hours. It was precise, complete, and attached my updated credentials, my qualification history, and a remediation timeline for every open item the suspension review had identified. I had written dozens of letters like it over 13 years. I knew exactly what the agency needed to see and exactly how to present it. I submitted it at 12:47 p.m. The FDA acknowledged receipt at 3:15. The inspection was scheduled for day 28 of the original 30-day window. That gave me 6 days. I worked all 6 of them. Not alone. B and Thomas worked alongside me, and the 3 quality managers who had been trying to hold things together under Dominic's direction worked alongside us. And by day 4, it was clear that those 3 managers were competent people who had been put in an impossible situation and had done the best they could with no support and no authority and no one to tell them what the inspector would actually be looking for. I told them. In detail. For 6 days. The inspection lasted 2 days. The lead investigator was not Patricia Juan. It was a man named Robert Castillo who had been doing pharmaceutical inspections for 14 years and had the particular quality of someone who has seen every way a quality system can fail and is not easily impressed by one that hasn't. He was thorough. He was precise. He asked questions that required real answers. We gave him real answers. On the afternoon of the second day, he closed his notebook, looked at me across the conference table in Veridian, and said, "Your documentation system is intact." "Yes," I said. "The gaps from the last 3 weeks are documented and remediated." "Yes." He looked at his notes for a moment. "Miss Solís, how long have you been in this role?" 13 years, I said, with a brief interruption. He looked at me. Something passed across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite a question. "The facility is in acceptable compliance status," he said. "We'll issue the formal clearance within 10 business days." The clearance came in 7. The manufacturing license suspension review was closed. The facility was cleared to resume full production. The cardiovascular line came back online on a Tuesday morning, and the floor supervisor, a man named Greg who had been running production at Veridian for 11 years and had spent the last month watching his line sit idle, sent me a text at 6:47 a.m. that said simply, "Running." 1 word. I understood everything it contained. 8 months later, Veridian Pharma looked like a company that had learned something very expensive and decided to become better because of it. My title was Vice President of Quality. The quality function had been rebuilt from the ground up, not just restored. The Veridian quality management system was now a four-tier structure with redundant oversight, cross-trained personnel, and a succession plan that meant no single departure, including mine, could create a compliance gap. Because the lesson of the last 13 years was that systems built around a single person are not systems. They are dependencies. And in a regulated industry, dependencies are not just vulnerabilities. They are violations waiting to happen. Bia Konkwo was now Senior Director of Quality Operations. She had a team of 5, a direct reporting line to me, and a seat at the monthly executive review. She had also, on her own initiative, redesigned the quality certificate generation process so that no customer request could sit in a queue for more than 48 hours without triggering an automatic escalation. She told me about it in a Tuesday stand-up like it was a minor update. It was not a minor update. It was the kind of process improvement that prevents the next Veridian cardiology situation before it starts. Thomas Reyes was Director of Regulatory Affairs. New title, new scope, compensation set at market rate for the function. The incident documentation he had maintained during the crisis, every flagged instruction, every overruled concern, every deviation he had caught and recorded, had been entered into the formal incident report as supporting evidence. He had been asked, by the board's outside counsel, whether he wanted his name attached to that documentation. He had said yes without hesitating. I had not been surprised. The Veridian Supplier Qualification Framework had been expanded into a full Veridian Compliance Governance Charter, which governed not just supplier qualification, but every regulatory submission, every inspection preparation, and every personnel change that touched a licensed function. The charter included a specific provision. Any change to a named responsible person on an FDA submission required board-level notification and a 60-day transition plan. That provision did not exist before. It existed now because of what had happened when it didn't. Veridian Cardiology Group reinstated their standing order in month 3. Dr. Cho called me directly. Not the CEO. Not sales. Me. I understand you're back, he said. I am. Permanently. Yes. A pause. Send me the updated quality certificate protocol. I sent it that afternoon. The standing order was reinstated at $4.1 million annually, slightly higher than before, with a new quality assurance addendum that I had drafted specifically to give customers like Dr. Cho direct visibility into our compliance status on a quarterly basis. He signed it without negotiation. That is the highest compliment he knows how to give. Dominic Farrell was still at Veridian, not as Vice President of Operations. That title had been quietly restructured in month 1. He was now Director of Facilities and Administrative Services, a role with a narrow lane, no authority over regulated functions, and a reporting structure that went through the COO rather than directly to the CEO. He had an office on the second floor, away from the boardroom, away from the quality suite, away from anything that required understanding what a named responsible person was or why it mattered. We were professional when we needed to be. He had learned, over 8 months, to ask questions before making decisions, which is the minimum viable improvement and also, for some people, the hardest one. He had also learned, I suspected, that the distance between confidence and competence is not always visible until something goes wrong, and that in regulated industries, something going wrong has a specific and quantifiable cost. The formal incident report documented that cost precisely. Total financial impact of the quality function restructuring, $9.4 million. That number included the production losses during the suspension review period, the Veridian cardiology order suspension, the stock decline and associated investor relations costs, outside regulatory counsel fees, the emergency remediation work, and the cost of my first 2 weeks back, which had been billed at the consulting rate James and I had discussed before the permanent agreement was signed. That rate was $22,000 per day. It was in the report. Gerald Farrell had read the report. I knew this because Sandra told me he had asked for a copy before the board meeting where it was formally entered into the record, and that he had arrived at that meeting with handwritten notes in the margins. He did not comment on the consulting rate line item. Some numbers speak for themselves. My life outside the building was better in ways I had not fully anticipated. I took a full week off in September. Not a working vacation. An actual week with my phone on Do Not Disturb and my laptop in the closet. My husband, who had spent 13 years watching me eat dinner while reviewing batch records and take calls on Christmas morning and come home from vacations early because something needed my sign-off, looked at me on the third day of that week and said, "You seem different." Different how? He thought about it. Like you're not waiting for something to go wrong. I had been waiting for something to go wrong for 13 years. Not anxiously. Professionally. It was the job. The job required it. But the new job had been built correctly, with the right people in the right roles and the right systems in place, and a correctly built thing does not need its architect to hold it up by hand every hour of every day. That is the whole point of building something correctly. I thought about conference room Veridian sometimes. The rectangular table. The window looking out over the parking structure. Phil Garrett with his practice neutrality. Dominic with his folder and his rehearsed sentences. Sandra looking at the table with the expression of someone who disagrees with what is happening and has calculated that saying so will not change it. This is a strategic realignment and not a reflection of your contributions. What a sentence. What they meant was, we have decided your value is less than the cost of keeping you. What they discovered, 32 days later, when the FDA suspension review letter arrived and the named responsible person on the manufacturing license was no longer employed at the facility, was that they had been wrong about the math. The value of a thing is not what you pay for it. It is what you lose when it's gone. I had spent 13 years building something that could not be replaced by a reorganization chart and an operational excellence initiative. Not because I had made myself irreplaceable on purpose. Because I had done the work with enough care and depth that the work itself became irreplaceable. There is a difference between being indispensable and being good. I was trying to be good. The indispensable part was a side effect. The calendar block that started all of this appeared on my screen at 2:09 p.m. on a Tuesday. 60 minutes. Conference room Veridian. No agenda. No subject line. I walked into that room knowing what was in it. I walked out of it knowing what I had. Those are two different kinds of knowing, and only one of them matters when the FDA comes knocking. If you've ever been underestimated at work, I hope this story reminds you that quiet preparation always beats loud arrogance. If this resonated, like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And remember, they can eliminate your title, but they cannot eliminate your name from the license.